Welcome to this video about while loops. In this video, we are going to cover while loops, explaining what they are and how they work. We will also have some examples and exercises to help understand these loops. As we saw in the previous video, loops are used to repeat the execution of a block of code a number of times depending on one or more conditions. In the previous video, we saw the for loops. In this video, we will cover the while loops. Okay, so what are while loops? A while loop is a control flow statement used to repeat a block of code while one or more conditions are true. Just like for loops, they can be used to iterate through collections of data, like an array or list. But they are especially useful in other cases when we need to repeat the block of code until a condition is met. This is how we are going to write while loops in this course. First, we will have the keyword, which is while, and then the condition. Inside the while, we will have the block of code we want to repeat in this loop indented, and then the end while. And this is the diagram showing how while loops work. First, we have the while condition, and right after it, we check if the condition is true or false. If the condition is true, the block of code inside the loop gets executed. And it goes back to while condition to check if the condition is still true. If the condition is false, the loop ends. Just like the for loops, while loops also have iterations. Every time the block of code in the loop gets executed is one iteration. Here, we are initializing I to 1 before entering the loop. Then we start the while, including the condition. In this case, I must be less than or equal to 5 for the loop to keep going. Inside the while, we do our block of code for the loop and increase I. This step is important since if we don't change I, the condition will always be true. And we would have, which is called an infinite loop. In while loops, you always need to modify at some point the variable or variables you are using for the condition to avoid infinite loops. This is how our iterations will look like written one after another without using the while loop. In our last iteration, I is increased, making it equal to 6. This would make the while loop stop the next time it checks the condition. Now, let's take this example from the for video and change it to use while instead. We want to get the names of these 10 people, and we are going to use a while to do it. First, we initialize I to 1, since we are going to use it for the condition in the while. Then, we have while I is less than or equal to 10. If I starts at 1 and finish at 10, we can cover all the people here, and that's why our condition will check if I is 10 or less. Inside the while, we will write our code to get the person's name from that iteration. This means this while will go through this group of people one by one in order from 1 to 10 and would get their names one by one. So in this case, to get all the names for the 10 people, we would have 10 iterations. In each iteration, we would get one name and it would go in order from 1 to 10. Now let's see an example printing I in each iteration. We want to print from 1 to 5. So first, we will initialize I to 1. Then, we have while I is less than or equal to 5, and in the block of code for the loop, we print I and increase it by 1. This loop would print 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. This is because I is incrementing by 1 in each iteration of the loop, which means its value in the first iteration would be 1, in the second iteration it would be 2, and it would increase until 5. This is another example from the loop video, so you can compare how to do it with both loops. This time, we want to get the names of only the people who are in positions 1, 2, and 3. We can do this by initializing I at 1 and creating a while that checks if I is less than or equal to 3, and getting each person's name in each iteration. And just like in the for loops, we can also decrease I instead of increase it. In this case, to get the names in reverse order, we can initialize I to 10 and check in our while if I is greater than or equal to 1. Then, inside the while, we get the names and decrease I by 1 in each iteration. This will make it loop from 10 to 1, and the loop will stop once I is less than 1. In this example, we will have, again, 10 iterations. But this time in the first iteration, I will be equal to 10. In the second iteration, I will be equal to 9. And it would keep decreasing by 1 until I is equal to 1. Here, we want to find the first number that is divisible by 10 and print it. A number is divisible by 10 if after doing the division, the remainder is 0, like 10, 20, or 30. To know this, we can use the modulus operator that was explained in the second video of this course to get the remainder. In this example, we are initializing number to 1, since we are looking for the first number that is divisible by 10. we are also initializing a Boolean variable to false. We are going to use this variable in our while loop condition to know if we have found the number we were looking for or not. It is initialized to false because we haven't found the number yet. Inside our while, we will check if number modulus 10 is equal to 0. If it is, it means the number is divisible by 10. So we print out the number found and set the found variable to true to make the while loop stop. Also, in our while body, we're increasing number in case we didn't find the number in this iteration of the loop. So we can look at the next number in the next iteration. Now let's get into some exercises. We did a similar exercise in the previous video with the for loop. Here, we need to get the names for the people in the positions 5, 6, and 7. Don't forget to use a variable as counter for the while, like we have done in the examples in this video. You can stop the video here to write your solution, and I will explain it in the next slide. To get the names from the people in positions 5, 6, and 7, we can first create a variable that we are going to use as counter and initialize it to 5. Then, in our condition, we will check if this counter is less than or equal to 7. This while has 3 iterations. The person number 5 will be iteration 1, the person number 6 will be iteration 2, and finally, the person number 7 will be the third and last iteration in our loop. This is the second exercise. Here, we will use a while loop to find the first element in a list that is greater than a variable called number. We are calling the list numbers in plural. In this specific case, we will look for the first number that is greater than 6 in our list. You can stop the video here to write your solution. In addition to the variables we had before, I have added first a variable to track in which position we are in our list and a Boolean variable to track if we have found the number yet or not. Then, inside the while, we are checking if the number in the current iteration is bigger than the variable number, and if it is, we print found it and the number, and set the found variable to true to stop the loop. In the end of the while, we increase I to check the next number in the list in the next iteration of the loop if we didn't find the number we were looking for in the current iteration. And here we have the trace table for this loop. I explained trace tables in the last video while covering the for loops. These tables can be useful to understand which values each variable has in each iteration of the loop. In this case, we are going to cover the values for the iteration itself and the variables found, I when the iteration starts, numbers of I, and I plus 1. In the first iteration, found starts at false and I is 1. Because I is 1, numbers of I is the first element of the list. In this case, 3. And I plus 1 is 2. Here, the if condition is false, since numbers of I is not bigger than 6. So found doesn't change its value. In the second iteration, found is still false, and I starts at 2, which makes numbers of I equals to 5. 5 isn't greater than 6, so found doesn't change and the loop would continue. This loop continues until there is a number of I which is greater than 6, and this happens in the iteration 5 of the loop. In this iteration, we can see that I is 5 when it starts, which means that numbers of I will access the fifth element in the list, which is 8. As 8 is bigger than 6, the condition in the if is true, and the block of code inside the if is executed, printing out our phrase and changing found to true. Since found is now true, the next time the while checks the condition, it won't continue to the next iteration. For the next exercise, I want you to create the trace table for this loop, including all the iterations. You can track the number of iterations the loop is currently in, as well as the values for count and number. You can stop the video here to write it down. We can see that before entering the loop, count is equal to 0 and number is equal to 2. Then, in the first iteration, count increases by 1, which makes it 1, and number is equal to number multiplied by 2, which equals 4. And the same happens in the second iteration. Since number is less than 1000, the loop keeps going and increases count by 1 and multiplies number by 2, making count equal to 2 and number equal to 8. Since 8 is still less than 1000, the condition in our while is still true, and the loop keeps iterating, changing the values for count and the number again in a similar way to how iteration 1 and 2 worked. I have filled the rest of the table following the same logic. We can see that in iteration 9, number is equal to 1024. Since 1024 is greater than 1000, the while loop won't have a 10th iteration, since the condition number less than 1000 will be false and the while would end. That's it for the while loops. I hope everything was clear. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments. Also feel free to let me know if this video was useful in any way. If you can comment, subscribe or like the video so I can get some feedback to know if this is actually helping anyone out there. And see you in the next video where I will be covering functions.